Hey everybody, it's Rev from Into Gaming. Um, Today I'm going to do a three-part series on the Pubg loot system. How things spawn and configurations and everything for the loot spawn system, um, loot tables, the whole shebang. Um, Pretty much the reason why it has to be in three separate videos. There's a lot of information that I have to give out in these videos, so you can follow along. Can't really do a short 5-minute video covering all the aspects of this because it's pretty complex and comprehensive. So anyway, in this video we're going to start off with the loot spawn triggering, as far as how loot is literally spawned into the game world, its activation mechanism, and so forth. Um, we're also going to cover the loot spawning game stages, because there's three of them. There's the pre-round disabling. There's the round start. That's the playing section where we're enabling loot spawning, and then there's the post deploy scaling, um, and that's a performance uh, little tweak modification that Pubg did in one of the patches to help reduce spawn delay on the client end. So anyway, let's just jump right into this. And what exactly is a loot spawner? Um, in simple terms, let me get over here. In simple terms, a loot spawner is basically a target point. Let me just open this guy open. In the viewport. It's basically a point, literally a point, a location, um, and then it has a collision. Let me get this guy right here. It's got a collision that the player interacts with to trigger a specialized event. And in my specific setup, I have what I've deemed a spawn extents, and it's basically a volume of space that I can scale to different sizes, to where when something is going to spawn, instead of spawning everything on exactly where this point is in 3D space, wherever this point is in 3D space, I don't want to exactly spawn it right there, because if I'm spawning multiple items, they're going to be all piled up on top of each other in a mess, basically. So I use the spawn extents, and what that allows me to do is anywhere inside that extent, I can pick a location, any point inside that extent, and then spawn the item there. But I'll use the X and the Y coordinate of that spawn location, and then use the Z location of the actual target point, because this is what's going to be snapped to the floor. And I'll actually show you that real quick. So when I pull one into the map, let me just delete this guy. When I drag one in, it's going to automatically snap to the floor, but I have a process where I'll elevate it a little bit, and then I'll use the snap function to just snap it down to the ground. So I know that my point, that little white sphere here, is the is dead on. That's right there. Boom. It's flush with the ground, and I can just show you that right here. The actual point right here is right on that mesh. There's a floor mesh, a generalized floor mesh. Let me see if that's it. Yeah, and it's snapped right to it. So that's the basics of what an actual spawner is. So when the player's capsule collision hits this collision, they overlap, we fire off an event, and that event does all the spawning for that specific point. And I can actually show you this real quick. And we're going to go ahead and play it. Top left of my screen, it's max loot 1000. That's a limit to what I've set in this configuration. It's dynamic. I can change it to whatever I want on the fly. And then the current loot count is how many items have actually spawned. But each one of these little platforms here has a spawner on it. Can't really see it now, so I'm just going to turn on a rendering for collision that'll just show collision. And anything that's got collision enabled will actually get this little pinkish purple, highlight for the collision itself. But as I come up, you can see the collisions on me. The big circle, actually, see the big capsule that I have around my player. That's the capsule component, and that's what's going to trigger that overlap. So once I touch it, see, as soon as it touched, it spawned. It triggered that overlap. So we have basically the same thing inside Pubg. They might use a different component set onto the player for that collision, and they might have a different collision shape. But spheres are generally the best to use, because you could put something on the second floor and you'll have a collision underneath it looping, and it's radial, so you get the same from top to bottom, left to right, so forth, the same distance from the center point. So that's why I'm using those. But as I run through and touch these, they're actually spawning the item. The actual spawner is being deleted from the map, from the game. They're from everybody's game. So when I trip this, if this was multiplayer, which I could show you a multiplayer version of this, I might do that in a minute. When I trip this, that actor is deleted from everybody's version of the map, so that they can't trip it at the same time or ever. It's a first come first serve on the tripping, so we don't get double loots and triple loot spawns for the same spawner. But this is basically the principle that's used in Pubg. There's a few more dynamics to it, which comes into the game stages stuff. I mean, it's like pre-round setups and performance tweaking, but overall this is loot spawning. This is the mechanism that trips it. Now, to be clear on this, when you start looking at it, it's not when your client on your screen interacts with it. It's when the version of you on the server simulation actually trips it. If you're familiar with my three-man view, where we had the client side, the server side, and the opponent's view kind of set up, it goes through and it shows the three-man view. It would be the server's version that would be doing this triggering of these things. So the actual game mode, which only runs on the server, clients don't have a copy of the game mode. It only runs on the server. That is where all of this is handled at. So that's pretty much triggering. So I'm going to take a quick step and run through pre-round and the little game stages. The pre-round disabling, the round start enabling, and the post-deploy scaling. Let me just jump in and let's see. We're going to do pre-round disabling. So get over here and loop collision delay. What is that? 1 second. I'm going to set that to 50. No, I don't want 50. I want 15 seconds. Okay. Now, what this is at the beginning of a round, we all get dumped into a lobby so we can just run around on the map. Well, during that period of time, these collisions are disabled. The overlap event is actually disabled. Not technically the collision, but the overlap event. We can still collide, but it's just the event is not going to, be triggered. Um, and that's so that they don't have to, you know, move these spawners and whatnot, or destroy them, and then, you know, respawn them. So we're just going to disable them for the pre-round lobby time, and then once that's over with, so when we get popped up into the plane, um, then it's going to do all this. And it might be for, like in PUBG, there's that little bit of a stutter event that we have once we go to the plane. If you have your network graph on, you might see your ping go through the roof for like a second. That might be it, because there's a whole bunch of things that have to be, taken care of during that transition period. Um, it's also probably why they have such a long point before we can actually bail out of the plane. You get the plane starting position, and it's like maybe 10 seconds, 15 seconds before it gets to the point where you can actually eject out of the plane to actually deploy. Um, that's just like a time window to make sure that everything else in the level is set up, everything's good to go. But the overall pre-round disabling is basically what I just did. You'll see it on the screen. Um, Here we go. Overlaps will enable in 15 seconds. So we're in pre-round right now. Once we snap to the plane, we're going to enable everything. You'll get a red text here. After 15 seconds, you'll get the little message that says, well, all spawners are engaged. So now technically we can actually interact with those spawners and actually trigger them. So that's triggered. So I'm going to get up here and drop real close to this guy. We're going to start it again. I'm going to turn on these collisions so we can see them. So I'm running around inside it, and I'm hitting it, and it's not triggering. So once we get the red message on the screen, then we can trigger it. Now we're triggered. Now post deploy scaling. So once we get, we're in the plane, we've done all this magic here, we've enabled everything. Now, while we're deploying, these radiuses are huge. They're really big. And this is the tweak that they did for the spawn delay issue. They're making these spheres a lot bigger in the beginning of the game during deploy. So, because you're moving a lot faster too when you're coming down, and you're going to be able to get to a point really quick. But when they're big, we're hitting them sooner because they're bigger. We're going to hit them sooner, and that gives the server a lot of time to actually process all the spawning that 100 players are doing during the first few moments of game. And, get that message up there sooner. We're going to trigger it sooner, and then we can actually have the time to actually get this data replicated out to other players. And so by the time you get down to the ground, it should be actually there on your screen, because everything is spawned on the server. Nothing is ever spawned on a client. It's always spawned on the server, and then the server has to send that data to you, what it spawned, so you can actually replicate that on your end. I don't know if you actually noticed that in here. Let me take this loop collision delay, and I'm going to pop it back down to 1 second. And radius scale to this value is 500. Okay. I'm just going to go over to my loop spawner real quick and change something. I'm going to change this up to what it would be relatively in game, and then radius scale 2. So basically in early game, you can see these guys, they're huge. They're ballpark 75 meters or larger in radius. That's pretty big. And then they scale down. So we're gonna do this real quick. I'm going to do it from out here. So they're enabled, overlaps, done, and then you're going to see these pop down a little bit. Just a second, it just takes a few seconds. Boom, there we go. And all of them are rescaled, and that's the rescaling. So at the end of deploy, when the plane gets off out of scene, it's left the map area, that event, another event is triggered to actually start the scaling. And by that time, all players should be on the ground. If you're not on the ground by then, so be it. But all players should be on the ground, and we shouldn't need these large radiuses. We want to scale them back down so we're not tripping things that we're not going to be going near. So if I'm never going to go to those buildings over there, I don't need these giant things out here, so I'm colliding and spawning loot over on there when I don't need to spawn it. So we're going to scale everything down, and you'll see the scaling distance here. I mean, it's immense. I mean, these things are being spawned well before I should be in viewing range of them, and by the time I get to them, it should be you know, viewable. They're not cold any longer. So that's pretty much this whole process of triggering and how it works. So in the next video, I'll actually go into, you know, how loot is configured, you know, to spawn at certain specific places and everything. We'll look at adding a spawner to the map. I kind of showed that in this one, but we're going to do it again. We're going to add it to a map, and then we're going to configure that spawner to spawn certain things, and then we're going to do a few tests with it, and then I'll walk through preset configurations. So you can actually create a series of these little spawners that are preset to spawn certain things, or from a loot list. They have a customized loot list, so we can just drag and drop these into the world and do minor tweaks to them instead of having to fully configure each one that we drop. And we'll get into the RNG, you know, the randomization aspect and how that works, and then I'll hop over here and show you some practical application. So I have buildings over here that we can play around with. I'll whip these up real quick, so we can run around in there, and I can set up spawners and show you how a practical application of adding these to a map. So that'll conclude this video. Thanks for watching.